My name is Anna and I am 27 years old. For the past 2 years, I have been living with my parents and younger sister, and to be honest, it was not my choice. Let me tell you how I ended up in this situation, how step by step my independent life, which I had built with such persistence, turned into a memory, against which today's reality seems completely alien. After graduating from college, full of hope and determination, I was looking forward to the beginning of an adult, independent life. The day I signed the lease on my first apartment, albeit a modest one, with shabby walls and an old-fashioned kitchen, I felt on top of the world. It was just a one-room apartment in an old brick building, with peeling stairs and neighbors who seemed to know everything about each tenant. But it was my space, well, rented, of course, but in those months I really felt like the mistress of my destiny. I set a goal for myself, to save enough money to buy my own home someday, not a luxurious mansion, not an apartment in a skyscraper, but just a cozy place where everything would be my way. So I immediately began to live frugally. I took home-cooked food to work in plastic containers, tried not to spend money on restaurants, allowed myself such pleasures no more than once a month. If the budget allowed, I bought clothes at second-hand stores, where, by the way, you can find a lot of stylish things if you are patient, and continued to drive my old but reliable Honda Civic, which had served me faithfully since college. It was not a glamorous life, without photos from expensive spas and cocktails against the backdrop of the sea sunset, but I lived with a sense of inner dignity and pride. I watched with satisfaction as the savings account slowly but steadily grew. Every dollar was the result of my work, my patience, and the refusal of temporary pleasures for the sake of something greater in the future. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy! Meanwhile, my younger sister Lily was my complete opposite. She was only 17 when I moved out of the house, and she easily took the central place in our family, becoming the absolute favorite. Mom and Dad spoiled her as best they could: designer clothes, the latest gadgets, expensive cosmetics. Everything that she only stuttered about immediately appeared in her hands. It seemed to them that Lily should be surrounded only by the best, as if luxury could protect her from the difficulties that I had already learned to cope with. They even allowed her to take the car without any discussion, shiny, new, bought with family savings, which I was afraid to even park next to, so as not to accidentally scratch. Every Sunday I would come to my parents' house for dinner, trying to remain calm even when Lily, her eyes shining and her squeals of delight, would start bragging about her new acquisitions. "Anna, look at my new Gucci bag. Isn't it amazing?" she would twirl in front of me, holding up this symbol of her easy and carefree life, knowing full well that I wouldn't find anything worth half as much even in a thrift store. "Oh," she would say one day, "is that the same sweater you were wearing in those pictures online 3 years ago?" I tried not to react. The sweater was in good condition, warm, comfortable, and I liked it. Why change something that works well? "Because it's not in fashion anymore." "My God, Anna, you dress like a granny," she said one day through laughter, glancing quickly at her parents as if seeking their support, a wink, a little encouragement. Mom and Dad said nothing, they just smiled or quickly changed the subject. I think they thought she was joking, but I honestly felt uneasy. Meanwhile, I kept working hard, tirelessly. I worked in marketing, gained experience, learned from senior colleagues, took part in difficult projects that sometimes took all my energy, and at some point, I even got a promotion, a small victory. But for me, confirmation that my efforts were not in vain. I had a small circle of close friends with whom we organized cozy home movie screenings, went on short walks on weekends, and organized coffee meetings where we laughed, shared thoughts, and felt like ourselves. I was truly happy with my life. But shortly after my 25th birthday, everything changed. I came to Sunday dinner as usual, expecting the usual chatter, Lily showing off her new shoes and the smell of my mother's stew. But as soon as I stepped through the door, I sensed that something was wrong. My father was unusually silent, sitting with his eyes downcast, with some strange tension in his face. My mother, on the other hand, looked disheveled. Her eyes were red, as if she had been crying. Even Lily, who usually chatted incessantly, was somehow quiet, absently scrolling through her phone and not saying a word about her new purchases. "Let's sit down at the table," my mother said, and behind this simple sentence there was a kind of dull, drawn-out silence that made my heart clench. Finally, Dad cleared his throat, as if gathering his courage, and his voice was low and controlled. Anna, we need to talk about something important. Mom reached out and squeezed his hand, and I felt anxiety building in my chest. Your dad lost his job last week, the company started laying off people, and they fired his entire department. I slowly put my fork down, looking at his face, which was now so tired and guilty. Dad, I'm so sorry, it's terrible. Mom started fiddling with her napkin, her eyes shining as if she were fighting back another wave of tears. The thing is, Anna, she said, we don't know how we're going to handle finances. Lily's college payments start next month. And then there's the mortgage, the car loan, the bills. And then all three of them looked at me. I already knew what I was going to hear, I knew it before I said it out loud. Anna, Mom said quietly, her voice shaking, we hate to ask you this, but we're desperate. Could you please move home for a while? Until your father finds a new job. If you contributed to the household expenses, we could continue to pay for Lily's education and keep the house, Mom said, not looking me in the eye, as if it was painful for her to say out loud what had previously seemed unthinkable. I felt my heart squeeze, as if something inside me was crumbling. My independence, my freedom, my little apartment that I had furnished with such love, all of it suddenly became unimportant, subordinated to someone else's misfortune, someone else's fear. It felt like someone had punched me in the gut, unexpectedly, painfully, so that for a moment my breath was taken away, and I realized, I have no choice, I can't refuse, I can't say no when my mother is sitting across from me with tears in her eyes, my father is staring at his plate with drooping shoulders, and Lily is silent, her lips pressed tightly together. How much will you need per month? I asked, and these words, barely leaving my lips, seemed to dissolve the thin thread that still connected me to my previous life. I was already mentally saying goodbye to my apartment, to the smell of coffee in the mornings and silence, to the shelf of books by the window and the quiet evenings when I could just be myself. Mom quickly calculated the numbers in her head, she was always good at calculations, and said, about $1,800, that will be enough to cover Lily's tuition and help a little with the bills. This amount stunned me. It was almost all that I put aside every month, almost everything for which I had led an ascetic lifestyle in recent years. But my parents were sitting in front of me, and as much as it hurt, I knew they needed me now more than ever. Okay, I breathed out, like I'd jumped into cold water. I'm handing in my resignation this week. My mother burst into tears and rushed toward me, hugging me tighter than she had since I was a little girl. You're saving us, Anna, you're really saving our family, she whispered through her tears. My dad looked a little relieved. He nodded and added, it won't be for long, princess, just until I get back on my feet. Even Lily, who had always been reticent about my efforts, said, thank you. Anna, I didn't know what I'd do if I couldn't go to college with my friends. It was weird coming from her. Part of me wanted to believe she was being sincere. 2 weeks later, I was back in my childhood bedroom, or rather, what had once been my bedroom. In the time I'd been living on my own, Lily had turned it into a walk-in closet. The space was filled with hangers, shoe boxes, vanity tables. Now her clothes had been hastily moved to another room, but the closet was still filled with things she seemed to have forgotten about. The room seemed much smaller than I remembered, with its pale blue walls and the single bed I'd slept in at school, dreaming of one day being an independent adult. I'd had to put some of the furniture into storage just to fit in. That first night, lying on that narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, I consoled myself with the thought that this was temporary, that Dad would find a job and I would quickly catch up. I was sure that I would return to my old life as soon as they got through this, but then I couldn't even imagine how wrong I was and how much would change when I returned to my parents' roof. The first few months were bearable. Mom tried, she cooked my favorite dishes, lasagna, lemon chicken, baked apples with cinnamon, as if she wanted to compensate for the sacrifice I had made. Dad would pat me on the shoulder and say with a kind smile, you're just a savior, Anna. I wanted to believe that it was not all in vain. I set up automatic transfers. On the first of every month, $1,800 would go into Mom's account, and every time the amount disappeared from my balance, I reminded myself that I was doing it for the family. And finally, about 3 months later, Dad found a job. That evening, we opened a bottle of champagne that had been stored since Christmas and raised our glasses. Laughter, smiles. Lily even turned on her favorite music. With a flutter in my heart, I asked, so, do you think I can start looking for a place again? I looked in Mom's eyes for that smile, that support, but it suddenly dimmed. as if someone had abruptly turned off the lights. "The thing is, Anna," she began slowly, as if each word was difficult, "your father's new salary, it's not what we had hoped for." Dad sat silently, staring at his plate. "It's barely half of what I used to get," he muttered. Mom took my hand and added, "We still need your help." I nodded, barely perceptibly, swallowing the disappointment that had risen like a bitter lump. Of course, family comes first, I had promised. I knew what I was getting into. But something in the atmosphere at home had begun to change. The gratitude I had felt for them in those first weeks had begun to fade slowly, like a candle left in a draft. Little comments had appeared, barely perceptible, but sharp as thin needles. "Anna, do you really need to spend 40 minutes in the bath every evening?" Mom asked one evening when I came out in a robe, my hair still damp. "It's wasteful." "You're not the only one living here." I nodded silently. The only luxury I still allowed myself was this evening bath, an opportunity to escape into hot water with a book, to shut myself off from the world, even if only for 40 minutes. I had cut it down to 20. Then there were the conversations about food. Mom continued to make lasagna, my favorite dish, at least once a month. Now, instead of my favorite lasagna or the beef stew that Mom made to thank me for helping, more and more often the table was filled with dishes that pleased only Lily: chicken parmesan, some trendy roast with herbs that I couldn't even identify, and fancy salads with rare ingredients that only puzzled me about the taste. It seemed like a small thing, but it's these small things, small, barely perceptible shifts, that begin to accumulate over time, like drops of water eroding a stone. More often, I was sent to the store for special products because Lily loves it and we don't want to upset her before exams. I paid in silence, biting my lip, trying not to think about how much it all cost. Every now and then, my dad would come to me and ask, "Anna, can you lend me $40 for gas? I just need to make it to payday." And of course I would, unable to refuse, even though I knew I would never get that money back. One morning, my mom came up to me while buttoning up her coat and said that her card was acting up again and that I could transfer her $100. She urgently needed to go to the hairdresser because her gray hair was really noticeable. I never got that money back either, and all this time, Lily kept showing up at the house with new things, as if to prove that she had everything under control. Expensive high-heeled shoes that she barely wore, a designer backpack sparkling with metal zippers, a smartwatch with a voice assistant and an app for breathing exercises. One day, when she burst into my room with another batch of glossy bags, I couldn't stand it any longer and asked, "Where do you get the money for all this?" She turned sharply to me, holding a box with the boutique's logo in her hands, and snapped, "Mind your own business. Just because you choose to live like a pauper doesn't mean I have to do the same." There was contempt in her voice. I knew I should have pushed harder, demanded an explanation, but I let her go. I allowed myself to ignore this signal. It was a mistake, a big one. The real breakup happened one Friday night. I came home squeezed like a lemon after a long workweek. At the last minute, my boss gave me an urgent assignment, and I stayed late to finish it. All I wanted was to close the bathroom door behind me, run hot water, add lavender-scented foam, pick up a book, and spend at least an hour in peace. Instead, I had barely crossed the threshold when Lily was already standing in the hallway, practically bouncing with excitement. "Here you go, I need $700. She blurted out without even saying hello. "We're going to the beach with friends next weekend, everyone's chipped in, and I'm the last one." I stood there, still in my coat and with my bag over my shoulder, looking at her, not believing what I was hearing. "And you think I'm just going to give you $700? I asked, surprised and irritated. Her smile faded, and something hurt appeared in her eyes. "Why not?" she said defiantly. "You don't spend the money on anything, and I help the family. You pay $1,800 a month for the house. That's for all of us." I stared at her, not believing my ears. "I don't have any extra money for your trips to the beach," I snapped. "God, you're so stingy," she snorted. "It's just money." Something inside me snapped. Years of pent-up frustration, exhaustion, and feelings of injustice came pouring out. "No, Lily," my voice shook with rage, "it's not just money, it's my hard-earned money, and I work 50 hours a week for it. Maybe if you'd gotten a job like I did in college instead of living off your parents, you'd realize what every dollar was worth." Her eyes widened and she took a step back as if I'd slapped her. "I have classes, I don't have time to work. I work 20 hours a week. And I have a full course load," she blurted out. I couldn't help myself, you're just lazy and stuck up. And then she burst into tears, not quiet, genuine tears, but loud, almost theatrical sobs that seemed to echo off the walls of the house. A few moments later, Mom and Dad appeared in the living room, alarmed, hurriedly pulling on their robes. What's going on? Mom asked, rushing to Lily and hugging her. Lily whispered through her sobs, Anna called me lazy and arrogant, she said horrible things to me. I stood to the side, clenching my fists, still breathing heavily with anger. She asked me for $700 for the trip, I explained, trying to maintain my composure. I refused. I told her to get a job and not expect anyone to pay for her lifestyle. How dare you talk to your sister like that in our house? Mom flared up. I held her gaze. In your house, which I help pay for, I said calmly. Mom blushed as if she'd been slapped. It's always like this, she said furiously. Every time we disagree, you throw your money in our faces. I looked at their angry faces, at Lily, pressed against Mom, and saw something false, theatrical, like a cheap play, in her tear-stained eyes. They didn't see what was happening, or didn't want to see. Okay, I said hoarsely, I'm going to my room. I closed the door, sank slowly onto the bed, and sat there for a long time, not moving, feeling everything inside shake with rage and pain. This wasn't what a family was supposed to be. It felt like exploitation, not support, not love. That evening was a turning point. From that moment on, I began to pay closer attention to what was really going on in the house. On Fridays, Mom, Dad, and Lily often went out together, explaining that they were going to Aunt Joan's or that Lily had some school business. But one day, I accidentally found receipts from restaurants in the laundry room, expensive ones with big names that I couldn't even afford. Lily's closet continued to fill with new clothes with such regularity, as if there was a secret source of endless funds hidden somewhere in the house that fed her whims and hobbies. As if times weren't hard and our family wasn't permanently dependent on my salary, she bought herself a shiny, thin MacBook for studying, as my mother explained, and a couple of weeks later an expensive camera with 3 interchangeable lenses appeared in her room for taking photography classes, which was apparently her new passion. I, meanwhile, was still driving my 10-year-old Honda Civic, which had begun to whine on turns and stall on every rainy day, and my jeans were held together by a thread and 3 neat patches, sewn on in secret at night because I was ashamed that I couldn't afford new ones. Months passed, 6 months, a year, then a year and a half. I tried to be patient, tried to believe that something would change, that Dad's job would stabilize, that Lily would grow up, that we would get out of this, but every time I even hinted at moving out again and starting my life over, something new would happen. Dad's car would break down, urgently, expensively, for several $100s. The roof of the house would start leaking. We can't wait until spring, Anna, it's threatening the whole structure. Lily's tuition would suddenly increase, as if by magic, and all of this would push me away again from my only dream, to have my own home, not a mansion, not a penthouse with a view of the ocean, but just my own space, where I could close the door and know that no one would come in without knocking. But more and more I felt stuck, trapped in a place that had no doors, no windows. That wasn't the worst part. The worst thing was that the family for whom I had sacrificed everything, my career, my money, my time, my personal life, didn't even seem grateful. With each passing day, I felt less like a daughter and a sister and more like an ATM that had no feelings. No fatigue, no right to say no. I could sit in the kitchen, and people would talk around me as if I didn't exist. Almost 2 years had passed since I had returned home. My savings account, which had once grown as a sign of my hard work, was now at a standstill, not moving up or down for months. And every time I thought about my future, about how far I was now from what I wanted so much, a simple, but my own home, I was overcome by a dizziness, as if from a sudden height, and almost nausea. The tension at home was growing. I began to stay late at work, taking on extra shifts, just to avoid coming home. Sometimes, especially in the evenings, I would sit in the car in the parking lot, phone in hand, looking at rental listings, knowing I couldn't afford any of them, and yet still sending my parents $1,800 a month. I felt like I was trapped in some endless cycle with no way out, and it was getting harder and harder to stay patient with each passing day. Then came the day that changed everything. I came home from work, tired and slightly headached from staring at a screen all day, to find my parents and Lily huddled around the kitchen table, hunched over my mother's laptop, they were talking animatedly, almost cheerfully, as if discussing something exciting. But as soon as I walked in, their faces faded, the conversation stopped, and an oppressive silence fell over the room. "What's going on?" I asked, setting my purse down on a chair. It was my birthday next week, and despite all the hurt and fatigue, I suddenly allowed myself the naive thought that maybe they were planning a surprise for me? Maybe a dinner or some kind gesture? Dad cleared his throat and, without looking up, said, "If you must know, we're planning a family trip." A glimmer of hope. "Oh, that sounds great. For my birthday, maybe for the weekend?" There was an awkward silence. Then Lily laughed, that same malicious laugh I remembered from her childhood, when she knew something I didn't. "Not with you," she grinned, "just the three of us. We're going to Cancun in 2 weeks." I stared at them, waiting for someone to say it was a joke, but no one did. "You're going on vacation to Mexico? Without me?" I barely managed to say, unable to believe it. "You have to work, dear," Mom said, as if that explained everything. "We didn't think you'd have a vacation, you didn't even ask me." My voice began to rise. "Since when can we afford to travel abroad? I thought we had no money." Lily rolled her eyes. "Oh, my God, Anna, don't be so dramatic. I deserve this trip. I study so hard." Deserved it? I didn't even try to hold back. And me? I work nonstop. I give you almost $2,000 every month, and you think I don't deserve anything? "There he goes," Dad muttered, "keeping count again." "Don't keep count," Mom interjected. "You don't have to remind us about money all the time. It's not a count." I was shaking with anger. "It's basic fairness. You get to plan a beach vacation without me while I pay your bills." Mom dramatically pressed her palm to her chest. "Keep your voice down, young lady. We're not going to live in constant guilt about money." "It's not about guilt," I hissed. "It's about fairness. How can you think that's okay?" "If you earned more," Dad said coldly, "you could afford a vacation too." That was it. Something inside me snapped, something died completely. I turned around and, without another word, went to my room, slamming the door behind me. I sat down on the bed, and tears rolled down my cheeks on their own, not only because they had left without me, not only because of the injustice, but because I finally saw my family clearly, without illusions. They didn't love me the way I loved them. This realization didn't come suddenly, like a flash of lightning, but slowly, painfully, like a bad tooth that has been aching for months, and you keep putting off going to the doctor, hoping it will go away. For them, I wasn't a daughter, not an older sister, not a person with feelings and dreams, but simply a resource, something like a money tap that they could open and close at their discretion. For the next week after that conversation about the trip, we hardly spoke. An icy silence hung in the house, and no one wanted to be the first to break it. They no longer mentioned their vacation in Cancun, and I, as hurt as I was, did not bring up the topic of the convention. I no longer believed that they would hear me. Meanwhile, my birthday was approaching, and despite everything that had happened, deep down I still hoped that they would at least remember it, acknowledge it, even in the simplest form. I didn't need a celebration, I didn't need gifts, I just wanted to be seen. Acknowledged. My 27th birthday arrived. I woke up early, as usual, got dressed in silence, and went downstairs to have a cup of coffee before work. No one said anything, not Mom, not Dad, not Lily, not a card, not a happy birthday, not even a smile. I wasn't exactly surprised, more devastated, but it still hurt. That was the moment when it finally became clear. There was nothing to expect from them. After work, despite being tired, I stopped at the supermarket and bought myself a small cake, nothing special, just a regular chocolate cake with white icing and the words "Happy Birthday" written in pink cream ribbon. I thought that maybe we could at least sit together, eat a piece, even if there was a wall of tension between us. When I walked in the front door, bag in hand, I immediately felt that something was happening in the house. A warm light was on in the kitchen, muffled voices were heard, and I heard the light clink of glasses. I stepped into the room and was surprised to see Mom, Dad, and Lily at the dining table. They were beautifully dressed, Mom in a silk top, Dad even with a tie, Lily with her curls done up and lipstick on, as if for a holiday, and on the table stood a large box, wrapped in shiny gold paper and tied with a beige satin bow. "Here it is," said Mom with a smile that barely touched her lips. Not reaching her eyes, "The birthday girl." I put the cake on the edge of the table, feeling something inside me start to tremble. I bought us something sweet, I said uncertainly. You shouldn't have bothered so much, snorted Lily, looking with disdain at the package with the supermarket price tag. I looked down and looked at the box. What is this? I asked, no longer knowing what to expect. Dad pushed it towards me. A present for your birthday. Come on, open it. For a moment, a spark of hope flashed inside. Pathetic, tiny, but still real. Maybe, despite everything, they did care. Maybe they realized they had gone too far. Maybe they had saved up some money and wanted to please me. I untied the bow, carefully lifted the lid and looked inside. There was a brand new suitcase, elegant, with many compartments, smooth, durable, as if from the cover of an advertising catalog. Wow, it looks very beautiful, I said, confused, still not understanding what was happening. I had never been given such expensive things before. Are we going somewhere after all? I asked, naively, almost childishly, and then all three of them laughed, but it was not a warm, joyful laugh. There was no love in this laughter, there was no kindness. Of course you're going, Dad said, and there was a strange, sharp irony in his voice. Mom leaned forward and spoke quietly but clearly, as if each word had been prepared in advance. We want you to pack this suitcase and get out of our house tomorrow morning. I blinked, as if trying to shake off the spell. What? We're kicking you out, Lily said, with the joy in her voice that might be announcing victory in a game. I'm going to turn your room into a closet again. I don't understand. Why now? Because we're tired of your attitude, Dad said sharply, tired of you constantly throwing it in our faces that you're helping us financially. I opened my mouth to object, but Mom waved her hand, cutting me off. We don't need your money anymore. Your father got a promotion 6 months ago. He's been making decent money for a long time now. We just haven't told you about it. So you lied to me? I whispered, my vision blurring. Took my money when you didn't need it? Dad shrugged, with a cold indifference I didn't recognize. Consider it payback for all the years we raised you. I looked at them, at the faces I'd known my whole life, and which now seemed alien, almost hostile, smug, confident, cruel. I didn't say a word. I just stood up and went to my room. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't smash mirrors or rip clothes like in the movies. I just felt a strange, icy sense of clarity. This birthday really was a gift. It had finally shown me who they really were, and that I needed to get away from them forever. I didn't join them for cake. I could hear them laughing downstairs, probably eating my cake, the one I'd bought with my own money. For my own celebration, alone, I lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what to do next. The next morning, I silently packed everything I owned into a new suitcase and a few old boxes. It took less time than I thought. I hadn't saved much in the 2 years I'd lived here. My parents and Lily were still asleep when I quietly, almost on tiptoe, left the house, not looking back, as if I was afraid that looking back would make me weaker, shake my resolve. I called an Uber, and the driver, without asking any questions, loaded my things, a suitcase containing my life, condensed to the bare essentials, and a few boxes containing the remains of 2 years lived not in a house, but in an illusion. The hostel I went to was a simple, modest place, without any frills or comfort, with a small room with 4 bunk beds, a shared bathroom with the smell of bleach and showers with sticking taps, and a kitchen where 6 people were having dinner on one stove at once. But sitting on the bottom bunk of my bed, surrounded by other people's things, other people's voices and smells, I suddenly felt something for the first time in a long time that flooded me like a warm wave. I felt freedom, rough, real, without embellishment. It smelled like a frying pan on which someone was frying eggs, and rubber flip-flops left by the door, but it was mine. The first week passed in a fog as if I was swimming underwater, and was just beginning to rise to the surface. I found a small studio apartment, tiny, but affordable on my salary, signed the lease, put down a deposit, and found myself on my new doorstep a few days later. It was even smaller than the one I'd rented right out of college, barely big enough for a single bed, a desk, and a tiny kitchenette, but standing there, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. No one could kick me out on a whim, no one could demand my money, no one could turn my existence into a tool for their own comfort. Setting up my new place was easy. I had next to nothing. I bought the bed through an online forum, a friend paid for the shipping, and picked up a table and 2 chairs from a hostile neighbor who was moving to another city. Everything was secondhand, a little scratched, and not always color coordinated, but with each new thing added, To the space, I felt myself coming back to myself, how I remember again who I am and what I deserve. The first month passed in complete silence, not a single call, text, or email from my family. I blocked their numbers immediately after leaving, but still, as if by inertia, I checked my email, as if expecting something, although I didn't know what. There was a lot of work, and I dove into it, agreeing to any additional tasks, taking on projects that others refused, staying late because no one was waiting for me at home. My boss noticed my diligence and, without giving a deadline, hinted at a possible promotion, and this tiny glimmer of recognition seemed more than all the praise I had heard from my family in recent years. Slowly, I began to rebuild my savings. Without this constant monthly leak of $1,800, my bank account suddenly began to grow, and I found myself opening the app several times a week and simply staring at the numbers, amazed at how quickly they were now increasing. I still lived modestly. Some habits are hard to break, especially when they come from pain, but now it was my choice. One night, I allowed myself dinner at a small restaurant, not fast food, not a quick lunch at the stove, but a real one, with a cloth napkin, a candle, and a small bottle of wine. To celebrate the first month of independence, I sat there alone and smiled. For more months passed, I did get a promotion, and with it a sizable increase in salary. I began to study first-time homebuyer programs, read about mortgage rates, compared neighborhoods, searched, slowly, but hopefully, maybe my dream of a home was not as far away as it seemed during those endless nights in the old nursery. And then, exactly 6 months after my expulsion, after that very birthday when I was thrown out of the house, the phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, it was unfamiliar, and for a moment I wanted to ignore it, but something inside me made me press accept. "Hello? Anna," came a familiar voice, and my insides sank. "It's Mom." Her voice was falsely soft, sickeningly sweet, like when she wanted something. "What do you want?" I asked coldly, trying to keep my voice even. "Don't be like that, honey," she sang, and I could almost hear the smile that wasn't there. "I'm calling because we need to talk. Can you come to our house?" "It's important." "No," I said firmly. "Whatever you want to say it now." There was a pause. I could almost hear her going over her options in her head. "Okay," she sighed, as if agreeing to something painful. "Your dad lost his job again, they were laying off again, and this time he got caught in the crossfire, too." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said flatly, as if I was reading from someone else's page. "Of course he's looking," she continued, "but the job market is terrible right now. Our bills are piling up, we're behind on payments, the bank is threatening to foreclose." I was silent, waiting. And finally, like clockwork, she said, "We need your help, Anna. We want you to move back in and help us pay our bills again, like before." I laughed, really, loudly and unexpectedly, even for myself. The laughter escaped my lips like a gust of spring wind. "You're kidding, right? After you kicked me out on my birthday, after you lied to me for months and took my money when you didn't need it?" "We made a mistake," Mom said quickly. "We were distracted by other things. You know your father's character, we all say things we don't mean sometimes." "No," I said, "I'm not coming back, not now, never." "But we're your family," she said forcefully, "we need you." "You should have thought of that before treating me like trash for 2 years, I said slowly, almost in a whisper, but with a confidence I'd never had before. "Goodbye, Mom." I pressed the end call button, not giving her time to justify herself, not giving her a chance to draw out her drama and try again to hook me with the feelings they'd been manipulating for years, as if I weren't a person, just a button to be pressed as needed. I dropped the phone on the table and felt my heart pound in my chest, not from fear, but from release, from finally saying what I should have said a long time ago. A few minutes later, my phone began vibrating nonstop, first one number, then another, then a third. They were clearly calling from different phones. My parents, Lily, maybe even acquaintances. I just turned on airplane mode. Then, an hour later, when I turned my phone back on, the messages came pouring in. Pleas, accusations, threats, offers to just talk. I blocked the new numbers one by one as soon as they appeared, and I continued to cook myself dinner, pasta with vegetables, a simple but warm, heartfelt dinner, the kind I used to dream of sharing with my family, only now I was cooking it for myself, and for the first time, it felt like enough. Over the next few days, they tried everything: letters with requests, text messages from unknown numbers, even a handwritten letter slipped under my door. It was especially creepy because I hadn't left them my address. I didn't open it. I just tore the paper up without reading it and threw it away. I had already given them enough, too much, of my life, my energy, my love, my time. There would be no second chances. And then, 2 weeks after that call, I got an email. The sender identified himself as my parents' lawyer. The message was formal, even terrifying. It said my parents were suing me for $24,000 for 2 years of living under their roof, ostensibly for food, water, and rent, at $1,000 a month. My first instinct was to delete the email, to throw it out of my mind, to call it a ridiculous bluff, but the signature, the logo, the tone, it all sounded so damned real. I did a quick search online and, to my surprise, discovered that the lawyer actually existed, working for a registered firm. My heart started pounding, my palms were sweating, I felt a little panicked. I called James, an old friend from college who had become a lawyer. We met that weekend at the cafe where we always had coffee after class, and I showed him the email. He read it, snorted, and put it down on the table. "They're bluffing," he said with a slight grin. "This isn't a lawsuit, this is emotional abuse, harassment. Can you help me?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. "Better," he nodded. "I'll prepare a formal response, for free, of course." That same day, James wrote back. It was a perfect letter, professional, cool, legally sound, and yet devastating. He briefly acknowledged their claim, then methodically demolished it, point by point, pointing out that I'd been sending my mother $1,800 a month for 24 months, amounting to $43,200. "If your clients decide to pursue legal action," the letter read, "my client will be forced to counterclaim for the full $43,200, plus legal costs and damages. We have bank statements confirming each transfer." James sent the letter from his law firm's official address that evening. The response arrived 3 days later. It was short, almost dry. The lawyer said his clients had decided not to pursue the case. That was it. No calls, no texts, no emails, total silence. I later learned through family friends that things were going badly for them. My father still hadn't found a new job. They had to sell one of their cars to pay for Lily's last year of school. Creditors were calling constantly. The house was in danger of being lost. A year ago, this news would have crushed me. I would have rushed to help. Despite everything they had done, I would have forgiven. I would have sacrificed myself again. But now, I felt nothing but cold, distant pity, the kind you sometimes get when you read a news article about people you have no personal connection with. They had made a choice. They had chosen to treat me like an ATM instead of a daughter. They had taken advantage of my kindness, my generosity, my loyalty, and then thrown me out the moment they decided they didn't need me anymore. Today marks exactly 1 year since I moved into my own place. I just signed the papers for a down payment on a small townhouse through the first-time home buyer program. It's not my dream home yet, but it's a stepping stone. It's a start. My savings account is better than it's ever been. I got another promotion, and perhaps most importantly, I've started dating a man who respects me, my boundaries, my goals, who doesn't ask me to sacrifice, but simply celebrates my victories. Sometimes, on particularly quiet evenings, I still feel a pang of sadness, not for the money, not for the things, but for the lost illusion of family. I thought I knew them, I thought they loved me as much as I loved them, but in that loss, something bigger, something more important, was born. I gained self-respect, I learned to listen to myself, I learned to say no, not just to others, but to myself, when it came to things that hurt me. I know my worth now, and I will never, under any circumstances, let anyone, family or strangers, make me forget that. As for my parents and Lily, I've heard that they're still struggling, but their struggle is not mine anymore. Their problems are the result of their decisions, not mine. I broke free, I built my own life, and for the first time in my adult life, I'm truly free, and no amount of money in the world will make me give that up.